Throughout the Beach Boys' storied career, several deaths have shaken up the band's lineup and trajectory. Dennis Wilson passed away in 1983 in a rather tragic way. Then in 1998, Carl Wilson died from cancer. While never considered a full-fledged member, keyboardist Billy Hinsche performed with the Beach Boys for many years before passing away in 2021. In this video, we'll be taking a look at how these deaths nearly tore apart the Beach Boys. As of 2022, while the Beach Boys are still touring, next to none of its original members are still involved. In fact, the only official Beach Boy to still perform with the group is Mike Love. Brian Wilson and Al Jardine, while still alive, have declined to play with the band that helped launch their musical careers and transform them into international icons. Dennis Wilson. While the Beach Boys projected an image of being avid surfers who were kings of the beach, the only Beach Boy who actually surfed was Dennis. In fact, he's the one credited with suggesting the theme for the group's first single, Surfin, in 1961. Dennis primarily played drums while providing backing vocals for the band. His percussion and vocal work can be heard on many of the band's hits, despite the fact there was a pervasive rumor going around suggesting he was replaced on studio recordings by other professional musicians. Initially, he hardly ever had any lead vocals on the band's singles, but his popularity and prominence as a singer-songwriter led to him enjoying increased presence on the band's recordings, especially following the release of their 1968 studio album Friends. Dennis's music was characterized by its perceived edginess while showing off his happy-go-lucky charm. Some of his standout songs with the band included 1968's Little Bird and 1970's Forever. It's been claimed by his friends and several biographers that he was the uncredited songwriter on the 1974 hit You're So Beautiful. Dennis's involvement with the Manson family. In 1968, Dennis was passing through Malibu when he saw two young female hitchhikers on the side of the road, Ella Jo Bailey and Patricia Krenwinkel. He ended up picking them up and dropped them off at their intended destination. A few days later, he noticed the girls hitchhiking once again. This time around, he took them back to his house at 14400 Sunset Boulevard. He later recalled telling them about his association with the spiritual guru known as the Maharishi. In turn, they told him about their own guru, a man named Charles Manson, who had recently been released from prison after being incarcerated for 12 years. Later that evening, after hitting up the studio for a scheduled recording session, Dennis was greeted in his driveway by Mr. Manson. When he walked into his house, nearly a dozen or so people were occupying his humble abode, the majority of whom were young, attractive women. These folks would later come to be known as members of the infamous Manson family. At first, Dennis was intrigued by Manson and his minions of easily influenced followers. He even referred to him as the Wizard in an interview published in Rave magazine around this time. The two quickly struck up a friendship, and over the following several months, various members of the so-called Manson family cohabitated at Dennis's home. Throughout their stay, Dennis reportedly spent nearly $100,000 on them to pay for living expenses, cars, clothing, and repeated doses of penicillin to treat venereal diseases. In today's figures, adjusted for inflation, that would equal to about $750,000. Dennis and Charlie worked on music together, and while he didn't consider him to be a phenomenal musician, Dennis still learned a lot from Manson and considered some of his musical ideas to be novel. While he ended up giving away a substantial chunk of his wealth to the notorious hippie cultists, Dennis claimed to have gotten a lot out of the deal. He said that his interactions with the Manson family resulted in him finding happiness and spiritual fulfillment. His bandmates weren't very pleased, however, with his newfound obsession with Manson's devotees. They lamented he was essentially giving away all his hard-earned cash while letting it get squandered by lavish living and frivolous pursuits. They tried numerous times to expel him from the band, but each time he managed to stick around to see another day. His final years were turbulent, to say the least. Much to do with association with Manson's drug-fueled, psychedelic, and violent cult, Dennis found himself struggling with mental illness, substance abuse, and alcoholism. On top of all that, he ended up bankrupt and dependent on his friends for help. This only exacerbated his already strained relationship with the Beach Boys. By 1983, the musician was homeless, hopelessly addicted to cocaine and heroin, and essentially useless as a band member. While recording his second solo album, Bamboo, in 1983, Dennis drowned at Marina del Rey, shortly after discharging himself from a rehab facility. He had spent the whole day drinking before diving into the marina to recover his ex-wife's belongings, which had been thrown overboard from his yacht 3 years prior. He was only 39 when he died. Carl Wilson. In 1998, just 1 year after announcing he'd been diagnosed with brain and lung cancer, Beach Boy co-founder Carl Wilson died in a Los Angeles hospital. He was 51. Just 2 months earlier, Carl's mother, Audrey, died. He was survived by his wife, Gina, and 2 sons, Jonah and Justin. Carl was the youngest of the 3 founding Beach Boy Wilson brothers. Throughout his tenure with the band, he was known as the stable one, in stark contrast with the off-the-wall antics of Brian Wilson, who suffered from severe mental illness, and the hard partier and Manson family enabler Dennis. Carl's voice was often featured as the lead, and after Brian Wilson descended into his own inner turmoil, he became the de facto leader of the group for many years. The previous summer, before his death, Carl had toured with the band after undergoing a round of chemotherapy. After his death, the Beach Boys were left with no other Wilson in their lineup, as Brian had stopped touring in the 80s and only occasionally makes sporadic appearances with the band. Billy Hinsche. In the 60s, Hinsche was a member of the band Dino, Desi, and Billy. Later on, he served as keyboardist for the Beach Boys touring band. Billy was born in the Philippines in 1951. In 1965, after his family moved to the U.S., settling in Beverly Hills, he formed Dino, Desi, and Billy after meeting Desi Arnaz Jr. and Dean Paul Martin at Loyola High School. He joined the Beach Boys as a session musician in the late 60s and proceeded to tour heavily with them. He continued to perform with the Beach Boys on and off until 1996. Throughout his decade-spanning musical career, he also provided backing vocals for artists like Elton John, Warren Zevon, and Joan Jett, among others. Hinsche lost his battle with lung cancer on November 20th, 2021. Sadly, on the same day, his mother Celia Hinsche also passed away. Billy was 70 years old. Now it's time to hear from you. Who is your favorite Beach Boy? Let us know in the comment section below. And before you go, make sure you give this video a like and subscribe to Facts Verse if you haven't already. Click the bell icon to stay updated on all our latest content.